Without any further ado, I would like to welcome all of you to our first webinar under the Green Road to Cali series. I am Umang Bhattrai, an environment specialist with the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department here at the Asian Development Bank. As many of you might know, the CBD COP16 is happening later this year in October, November in Cali in Colombia. So leading up to the COP, the Environment Group of the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department, CCSD, is organizing a 4-part monthly webinar series with an objective of exploring the latest developments in biodiversity conservation and nature-based solutions and facilitating discussions on advancing environmental sustainability. For the first webinar today, the Environment Group has partnered with the Procurement, Portfolio, and Financial Management Department here at the bank to bring you this session on the Playbook for Nature-Positive Infrastructure Development. The Playbook was released in September last year and jointly developed by WWF, FIDIC, and AECOM. The objective of the Playbook, and thus of this webinar today, is to showcase solutions across a range of sectors and landscapes to support the transformation of infrastructure to follow a nature-positive approach. In this session, we will have a presentation on the Playbook, followed by a panel discussion and Q&As to wrap it up. To formally begin our webinar, I would like to invite Jeff Taylor to provide us with his opening remarks. Jeff is the Deputy Director General of the PPFD here at the bank. He is ADB's Chief Procurement Officer and heads the MDB Working Group on Sustainable Procurement. Prior to taking on this role, he was the Director of the Procurement Division, overseeing projects in Central, West, and South Asia regions. Before joining ADB, Jeff worked in numerous countries, including Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Cambodia, and the Philippines, both implementing procurement and advising on procurement reforms. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much. And I would like to welcome everybody to this session with an apology. I'm the one that couldn't work out the backgrounds. So you've got a great big blue ADB instead of that stunning photograph that everyone else has. I would also like to, after that apology, I would like to welcome some of our key partners here, particularly WWF, who we have been working with for a considerable time, going back since to 2001. And WWF and the partnership with ADB is one of its longest and most diversified and successful. We signed our first memorandum with WWF in 2001, as I said, and the partnership builds synergies on each organization's strengths and the shared vision. We have an active focus on projects and programs, information sharing and knowledge management, capacity building, development of sustainable development policies and strategies. We've worked together on the Greater Mekong Sub-Region Core Environmental Program, the Coral Triangle Initiative for coral reefs and fisheries and food security, and the Heart of Borneo initiatives. They are by no means our only partner. Of course, we're joined here by my friends from FIDIC, who will be speaking a little bit later. I work extensively with FIDIC. We have a licensing agreement with them that provides the contract forms that we use in our operations. And FIDIC really is the gold standard in terms of construction contracting globally. So I welcome FIDIC. Also USG, as we call them sometimes, US government, not so much as a partner, more of an owner. They're one of our biggest shareholders. We work with them closely on many, many initiatives. And they're very generous with their donations to ADF as well. So key partners, but we work with trade, we work with Treasury, and across Geological Survey and many other parts of the US government. And of course, AECOM from the private sector with their expertise, really what is more of the cutting edge. We're a bank, we're somewhat remote, although not that far. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. When I first started out as ADB's Chief Procurement Officer, 3 years ago now, I found it challenging and somewhat alarming. Looking at the enormity of climate change and the problem facing us all. I got a bit depressed, to be honest, and then I cheered myself up by shouting at my children. recycling plastic, picking up pieces of paper for recycling as well, and sorting out my trash, and buying a reusable coffee cup so I could go down to the evil empire of Starbucks and feel less bad about paying $5 for a cup of coffee. And then I started to realize there was a huge amount I could do in terms of influencing for the good. And nobody's really going to remember me when I go, apart from, maybe that strange guy, English guy with the beard. I wanted to leave something a bit more substantive behind, and I focused in on sustainable procurement. And why? Well, obviously, because I've been doing procurement for 35, 36 years, and it's something I was pretty familiar with. But more that, we could be an influence for a public good through the way that we implement procurement. The procurement system I grew up in the 80s was very much compliance-based and adversarial. That really sort of said about many things, oh, that's not procurement, that's outside of the scope of procurement, we just look at the process. That has very much changed in terms of social, in terms of environmental, in terms of gender, in terms of core labor standards, in terms of lowering carbon emissions through scope 1, 2, and 3. In terms of supporting countries to help meet their nationally determined contributions, and in terms of having a positive impact or negating the negative impact on the planet through that which we do. So how can I at ADB help maximize the impact of sustainable procurement? And why is procurement so important? Well, $13 trillion a year goes through public procurement. That's an incredible, staggering amount of money. I can't even comprehend it, and I work for a bank that lends billions. But $13 trillion goes through public procurement. Even if we're going to have a small and incremental positive impact on sums like that, it will have a positive impact in terms of what we're doing within the function. So how can ADB help, or how does ADB help? Firstly, it's a bank. It's fairly obvious. We lend. But if we can shape our lending programs of what we do in the space of sustainability, of nature-based solutions that lessen the impact or even have preferably a positive impact, there's a lot we can do. We can provide technical expertise, either from within ADB and my colleagues across the hallways and the floors of ADB that are experts in this area, but also financing for procuring technical expertise in given areas. We can coordinate with other development partners, and that's one of the things I do. I head the Sustainable Procurement Working Group for the Multilateral Development Banks. And we came up last year with a joint statement on our ambition around sustainable procurement. And I do want us to go further, and we are coming up with common metrics for the evaluation of sustainable procurement in our operations. I'm currently exploring the measurement of embedded carbon across construction projects to see if we can actually incentivize contractors and purchasers to reduce the amount of embedded carbon and give them an evaluative advantage. Another way, and for example, in the Philippines, we have a deep and rich dialogue with the Philippine government in terms of influencing its procurement policy. The good news is we didn't need to influence them, we just needed to support them as they are adopting sustainable procurement policy and embedding it into their procurement laws through very recent reforms. Another area where we can have significant impact because of the sums of money, if we and our development partners and our government start sending signals to markets in terms of that which we procure, lower carbon cement, nature-based solutions and similar, it can have a significant amplifying effect. The market will read this and read into the future and perhaps re-engineer and gear its processes around lower carbon, nature-based solutions and so forth. So we can act as a catalyst to shape markets to be more responsive, more sustainable, and more environmentally friendly. We can explore proofs of concept with our clients For example, in Uttarakhand in India, we use low carbon cement, we use low energy pumps. We converted wastewater to industrial water using 80% less energy. And that provides, a flagship project of which we hope there to be a growing number of what Otto van Bismarck calls the art of the possible. What can we do? And this didn't actually come at higher cost. It came at a lower life cycle cost over the 25-year asset life because of energy efficiency. So there's a lot we can do. And not forgetting, in the broader sense, sustainable procurement will cover off environment, nature, economic and social development, improvements in governance, and resilience in supply chains and infrastructure. So typically, sustainable procurement should be playing a role in renewable energy, energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, low carbon products, and looking at disaster risk management, resilient infrastructure, and particularly with this audience, nature-based solutions. So what have we done so far at ADB? We came out with a guidance note on sustainable procurement in 2022. We've updated our standard bidding documents and templates to incorporate some of these dimensions, and we plan to go further this year with default evaluation methodologies that will capture environmental, social, and nature-based solutions. We are working at building ADB's own capacity with in-house training and, more importantly, well, as importantly, our borrowers' capacity. We have issued a gender-responsive procurement report, and from that, we will seek ways to make our procurement processes and outcomes more gender positive. We're leading on the MDB's Sustainable Procurement Working Group, as I mentioned. We have signed up and developed a Build for Skills handbook that provides vocational training through infrastructure projects. We're piloting, as we said, and we've undertaken country diagnostics of sustainable procurement across 41 DMCs. Later this year, I expect to be publishing those and making them available to the community at large. I will conclude there, bearing in mind I've spoken at you a lot, and hand over back to Umang. Thank you, Umang.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for all that you said in the opening remarks. We'll come back to that later in our panel discussions. Up next, I would like to invite Daduna Kokretse to provide us with her remarks on the state of engineering industry and the role of contracts for nature-positive infrastructure. Daduna is a general counsel at FIDIC and is overseeing FIDIC contract and legal activities. She advises on the delivery of corporate governance for the Federation and its global operations. She is responsible for FIDIC contract users relationship and is dealing with multilateral development banks and wider stakeholders. Daduna, glad to have you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I join Jeff in welcoming and giving recognition to our partners. I'm delighted to be addressing you on behalf of FIDIC today at this webinar introducing WWF and FIDIC Playbook for Nature Positive Infrastructure Development. As mentioned, my name is Daduna Kokretse, and I'm General Counsel of FIDIC at FIDIC, which is an international federation of consulting engineers. FIDIC is the global representative body for national associations of consulting engineers, and it represents over 1 million engineering professionals and 40,000 firms in around 100 countries worldwide. The buildings and infrastructure sector in which FIDIC members operate contributes around 36 trillion to global GDP. So as you can see, we represent a key industry and business sector. FIDIC also publishes standard form contracts for works for clients, consultants, sub-consultants, for joint ventures and others. Our documents are highly regarded. They are widely used and well trusted throughout the global construction and infrastructure industry. Currently, FIDIC forms are used in around 170 countries, and it's recognized as the gold standard, or as Jeff has mentioned, as the gold standard for construction and engineering sector. Sustainability is one of the three FIDIC's core founding principles, along besides with quality and integrity. And the drive to net zero is, of course, extremely important for FIDIC. It's not, in fact, just important, it is imperative for the global infrastructure sector. This is why it's key part of FIDIC's works, especially given that the sector plays a crucial role in contributing to climate change, as the infrastructure industry is responsible for significant portion of global emissions. And at FIDIC, we view the pursuit of net zero as crucial driver of innovation and sustainability. It's one of the key reasons as well why FIDIC has teamed up with WWF and in partnership with AECOM to develop the Playbook for nature positive infrastructure development. Of course, the issue of nature positive infrastructure is crucial, especially as new policies and regulations that require disclosures on climate and biodiversity impacts are expected to drive a more robust approach to protecting and enhancing natural ecosystems during infrastructure development. And it goes without saying that we must do better. We must do better in the development of nature positive infrastructure. Working in partnership with WWF, FIDIC has made an important intervention for the industry by developing the Playbook to provide some examples of projects that relied on nature-based solutions as well as green and green-gray solutions, and we hope that it will help drive change in the sector. Together with other projects like the Global Leadership Forum's Carbon Initiative, FIDIC's Climate Change Charter, FIDIC's initiative on net zero clauses, FIDIC is looking to take a leadership position on the issue of net zero, sustainability and decarbonization. And my colleague, Graham Portin, who is on the panel today, will talk more about our advocacy and policy work in this respect. I'd like to say a few words about how FIDIC contracts contribute and help to embrace nature positive infrastructure development and the new initiatives that FIDIC is taking in order to take into account the latest environmental challenges and developments into the industry. FIDIC has built an excellent relations with multilateral development banks like the ADB, and many of whom use our contracts on projects they finance and include the documents as part of the bank's standard bidding documents. As a result, in collaboration with the multilateral development banks, those contracts are supportive, inclusive and sustainable growth and good governance in many regions of the world. The contracts for works of FIDIC contracts are selected based on the risk allocation, size and complexity. Account is given to factors such as who designs, who operates, how is the ground conditions and other risks allocated. So depending on those factors, any of the FIDIC standard form contracts may be used for green infrastructure. For example, the FIDIC's construction contract, FIDIC Red Book, been used for coast protection and for flood barriers. The Yellow Book, which is the FIDIC's contract for plant and design build, with the contractor's design being used for wastewater treatment plants, for the water waste to energy and for other projects. FIDIC Green Book is also suitable for the water projects. Silver Book, which is the FIDIC's EPC turnkey project contract, is used for hydro project where deforestation has to be compensated and natural habitats restored. And green books are also suitable, for the green urban spaces. It's been used for projects including sustainable solutions. FIDIC White Book, which is the FIDIC's consultancy agreement, provides for the opportunity to include in the scope of services the nature-based solutions and to embrace that on all projects. In addition to existing FIDIC forms, FIDIC has identified the need for a new standard form for offshore wind farm projects. Currently heavily amended FIDIC Yellow Book is used presently, and due to the specific risk allocation related to the marine equipment and works, it was deemed appropriate to develop a new form of contract for offshore wind farms, and which is under the development by the task group under the FIDIC Contracts Committee. FIDIC has also taken initiative to develop the guidance to take into account the requirement for net zero and to provide some clauses to be plugged in and used with the contract. This will look at the whole project life cycle and include new net zero compliant clauses to ensure that they are aligned with the industry aim and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Building on the long-lasting experience and track record of the FIDIC forum, so FIDIC prides itself on keeping its contracts up to date with the latest industry and social needs and aligning them with net zero, sustainability and nature-based solutions being used for our sector is, of course, a key priority for us. So I'm delighted to provide you with those remarks and looking forward to the discussion later. I hand back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Daruna. It is indeed exciting to have FIDIC participate and guide the work on nature-positive infrastructure development with FIDIC's influence and ability to make a significant impact. Thank you for that. Now I would like to invite Milika Apostolovic for a presentation on the Playbook. Milika is a senior sustainability and resilience consultant with AECOM's carbon and ESG practice, supporting cities, national governments, and private sector clients to develop effective strategies and action plans for climate change mitigation and adaptation. She has previously worked for the FAO and UN Economic Commission for Europe on forest landscape restoration, urban forestry, and mechanisms for monitoring the state of world's forest. Milika was also one of the lead authors of the Playbook. So welcome, Milika.
Thanks a lot, Monk, and for the introduction, and thanks a lot for the invitation to talk about the Playbook. It is indeed a project we are all, myself and the team, are really passionate about and always keen to talk to new audiences about it and give a bit of a deep dive into the material to hopefully inspire new generations of civil engineers and infrastructure practitioners to integrate nature into infrastructure design and planning. I have decided to keep the PowerPoint. I'm going to use a couple of slides, hopefully not too many, just because I would like to spend a little less time flicking through the slides and a little bit more time talking about the actual content of the Playbook. Always delighted to pick up any questions or kind of separate chats about any aspect of the Playbook, case studies, or technical approach methodology, either during or after this webinar. I'm going to start a little bit, talking a little bit about the rationale and the context behind our decision to not just develop this document, but to develop it in the way we did, because I think in terms of its structure and content, it deviates quite a bit for similar guidances for nature-based solutions that exist out there. Then I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the actual content, talking a little bit structure, how we've organized it along different infrastructure sectors, and how the document should be read and used. And then I'm going to wrap up by moving towards some of the key messages that we decided to single out on the basis of research we've done in the Playbook. So they're not directly related to the technical content, but more provide of an overarching context of things we've noticed whilst we were preparing this document. So on that note, I am not going to spend a lot of time talking about why this topic is important. I think that previous speakers have already done that way better than I could. But I do think the timing as to why we're doing this right now is really crucial. As a lot of people in this call will know, we do live in an age of unprecedented biodiversity and nature loss. A lot of this is driven by our consumption patterns, infrastructure development, growing urbanization. So globally, we see trends that, whilst they vary in severity between regions, are pretty much consistent in their impact on nature and biodiversity. So WWF and FIDIC partnered to develop this strategic document that will effectively provide a type of global guidance for effective integration of nature as a consideration into infrastructure development and planning. And they specifically wanted to focus on projects that go beyond how nature is traditionally considered within infrastructure development, which is really all about minimizing the impact. So the idea was to find great examples of projects implemented anywhere in the world that go beyond, let's minimize our impact on nature, let's reduce it as much as we can, to, are there actual projects that have brought net positive impact on nature biodiversity where they were implemented? So obviously that was a huge, really significant aspiration. And as you will hear later as I go through the document, it wasn't that easy to find projects that clearly qualified as such, primarily because, well, it's a difficult thing to achieve. And secondly, a lot of the benefits of the projects that we have identified and listed in the playbook do not have measurable benefits to them. So clear KPIs, clear benefits that were achieved that have been measured and so on and so forth. So it's really difficult in that sense to define. We can define what a nature positive infrastructure development is, but finding projects that fit tightly into this very narrow definition has not really been that straightforward. So we have since decided to, for this reason, recognizing that the sector is still at fairly early stages of moving towards this nature positive transition, we have decided to expand a little bit the scope of the playbook to include vast majority of examples that do aspire, that show where each infrastructure sector currently is, and that show clear aspiration and kind of make it clear that we are still on that path. We are not quite there yet, but we are moving in that direction. And on that basis, we have decided to make the playbook an iterative document that will be updated every couple of years as more and more projects become available, reflecting the fact that, as I say, as an industry, we're not quite there yet. So we have published last year, as we have heard from Umang, the first iteration of the playbook. And the playbook is currently undergoing an update with new added chapter on sustainable procurement and some additional case studies based on some really great examples that we have learned about since we published the first one. And the hope is to continue publishing new updated versions as new projects become available and as sector is moving more decisively in this direction. So that's a little bit of a context and the background as to why we decided to develop this document right now. I'm now going to talk a little bit more about the structure of the document itself and key technical bits to it, including why we decided to structure it in this particular way. So what you will see on the screen is a general overview of the document. So it contains introduction, it's structured around sectors, benefits, solutions. That were the overarching methodological kind of framework that we applied to its development. It also contains a long list of additional sources that include guidance documents, design guides, and so on and so forth, in recognition that we cannot cover within the scope of this document absolutely everything, and reflecting the fact that we do talk about quite a few solutions for which there already exist detailed design guides, and we didn't think it would be worthwhile repeating that information elsewhere. It also contains key messages that summarize our findings from the vast research that we have done in the preparation of this document. But the reason we decided to structure it along these lines, sector benefit solutions, is, well, the idea was we have observed, as I was mentioning at the beginning of my presentation, there are a lot of really valuable, really good, technically really strong documents focused and strategic guides focused on integration of nature-based solutions. But they tend to be very non-sector specific. So they're not necessarily very useful for infrastructure practitioners, say in transport or energy. They tend to be quite general and generic. So a civil engineer, for instance, who's looking into a way of integrating NBS into their road infrastructure project will not necessarily benefit from them as much as an engineer, for instance, working on coastal resilience. So the idea was to really structure the playbook in a way that would be of use to particular sector to which practitioner belongs to. And we think this is what makes the document uniquely useful to different types of practitioners. And indeed, the feedback we received to date suggests that we were able to achieve this objective. Then we wanted to have a dedicated section discussing key benefits that were identified, where possible measurable benefits, although as I also mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, this isn't always the case. A lot of these, unfortunately, a lot of countries, a lot of places where these projects are implemented do not have a standardized way of measuring some of the benefits, especially those that fall outside of the realm of conventional benefits associated with NBS, which are climate resilience, carbon, and biodiversity. So other environmental benefits, economic and social benefits remain unquantified, which, as I will also mention later on when I discuss key messages, is what we think is slowing down uptake of some of these solutions. And then the final key segment here is, of course, the section solutions themselves. Since the document is global in scope and covers solutions implemented worldwide, we have struggled a little bit to categorize some of the solutions, because at times, of course, a solution applied into different countries or through different countries will be called differently. But we really wanted to develop almost a type of taxonomy for some of these solutions, because they are ultimately doing the same thing, providing same types of benefits, require similar considerations for implementation, and so on and so forth. So the idea was to come up with a taxonomy of 30 to 40 solutions. And the idea is also, of course, in the future updates of the playbook to further grow this list as new and innovative solutions appear, so that we can have a common language between practitioners in different countries when they're talking about some of these solutions. So that is kind of the overarching framework and methodology that informed the development of the playbook. I now want to talk a little bit more about each of these in detail. So the first, the slides that you're seeing right now is showing the typology that we developed specifically for this playbook that focuses on solutions we've identified across 5 key infrastructure sectors. Those are transport, energy, water and wastewater, buildings and public spaces, and coastal protection. So most of the solutions we identified were specifically applied to one of these 5 sectors. Then, in further recognition that there are many subtypes of infrastructure within these sectors, we decided to further split those out, so you can see those in the external circle surrounding the initial typology. So for transport, we specifically looked at solutions applied to inland road and rail projects, coastal highways and roads in close proximity of coastlines, aviation, ports and maritime transport, and urban roads, which we wanted to specifically look at differently from larger kind of scale transport development projects. Then for the energy sector, we specifically wanted to separate out projects implemented around new developments for renewable energy and projects implemented often for the purpose of either carbon and biodiversity offsetting by non-renewable energy actors. For water and wastewater, we decided to focus on water supply, storage, quality, and distribution, wastewater and sewage sanitation, and drainage and stormwater, in recognition that some of the specific MBS applied tend to be very specific to one of these, not all of them. And then typology for buildings and public spaces really focuses on residential buildings, solutions implemented in non-residential buildings, and then solutions we categorize as applicable to various types of open green spaces in urban and non-urban areas. And then finally, for coastal protection, we wanted to make a simple distinction between type of hybrid infrastructure solutions, so that contain a type of green and gray solutions together, and those that specifically rely on natural coastal infrastructure, so restoration of either pre-existing or introduction of new elements into natural coastal infrastructure to achieve coastal resilience. So that is the overarching overview of the sectors breakdown that we've done. It's worth pointing out, and I don't expect anyone in the call to be surprised by this finding, that a lot of the solutions that we've identified are predominantly falling into 1 or 2 sectors. So probably the most advanced infrastructure sector in this regard will be water and wastewater. So many MBS and many fantastic examples of innovative projects are specific to this sector. There are quite a few obviously related to buildings and public spaces, especially in urban areas. Coastal protection, likewise. I would say that transport and energy are probably those where we struggle the most to find good examples. So we do have examples, but particularly good examples of innovative, scalable, interesting solutions applied to these 2 were, I would say, most difficult ones to identify. And I will come to some of further observations on this at the end of my presentation, but I would like to use this opportunity to ask everyone in the call if you are aware of some great examples that fall into either one of those 2 sectors, or indeed any other that you would like to share with us. We would be delighted to include that in future iterations of the playbook as we're trying to grow evidence base for effective solutions across these sectors. And I have also mentioned that we decided to categorize some of the benefits we've identified along key benefits and additional benefits. This is indeed reflecting how these benefits were prioritized in selection of solutions for the projects we chose. So most of the projects we screened were specifically implemented with the view of these three key benefits. So biodiversity through habitat creation, restoration, or improved connectivity. Carbon through reducing embodied and operational carbon, increasing carbon sinks, carbon offsetting, and so on and so forth. And resilience. So most of the time, this specifically relates to the implementation of NBS, but specifically in the context of climate resilience. But there were some that also sought to reduce the risk of non-climate related ones. So we've decided to focus on the most commonly referenced ones. So flood risk reduction, geotechnical resilience, coastal resilience, temperature regulation, and drought risk reduction. In terms of additional benefits, again, this, as we all know, nature-based solutions bring together so many additional benefits. But in terms of those that were most commonly referenced and where there was some stronger evidence base, we decided to focus on three key categories. Those include environmental benefits, most notably in terms of improvement to quality of air, soil, and water. Economic benefits in terms of newly created jobs, improved livelihoods, food production, cost savings, direct return on investment, land value uplift, other, which is a broad category that includes things like revenue from tourism, for example. And then social benefits, which can include anything from cultural services, health and well-being, recreation and amenity, and so on and so forth. So this is the quick summary of the those benefits that were specifically mentioned by project owners and designers as those that were successfully realized with the implementation of these solutions. And then the longest and indeed most comprehensive section of the playbook is, of course, focused on the solutions itself. We have decided for the first iteration of the playbook that it might be worthwhile separating these, looking at in terms of coastal and riverine solutions and those that apply to inland and urban environments. But this is not a definitive categorization. Obviously, some of these solutions can be applied in both of those contexts. I also mentioned that there is circa between 30 solutions that have been organized within particular categories for the ease of reading and for the ease of clearly linking them to particular sectors. You will see here an example in the playbook as to how presentation of each solution was done. So we include a little bit of a summary as to what was done, what the solution entails, when is it suitable, some common success factors. What are the most common key benefits or co-benefits? So linking it back to the previous section. And in that section, you will also find references to projects where they were clearly implemented. So you can just follow that link through and you will be able to read more about how this specific solution was identified in different contexts, different countries, and different sectors. I want to now talk a little bit more about key messages from the research we have done. So for the purpose of the playbook, we have reviewed hundreds of examples of projects implemented worldwide. I think the initial figure was around 400, but after the first screening, we have cut that approximately into half and selected around 200 projects in which we wanted to have a little bit more of a deep dive, just because we thought that not all projects that necessarily were submitted or that we found necessarily represents or kind of are sufficiently adequate to qualify as a kind of as a nature positive or as a nature-based solution in the specific context. So the final analysis included around 200, maybe slightly more than that, projects that are, most of which are in the playbook that you can read more about themselves. And through this analysis, we have come to several what we thought were quite interesting findings, some of them surprising, others maybe not so much. The first one of which is, whilst nature positive infrastructure development might be high on the agenda, in general, there's a lot of talk. There's been a lot of talk about nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Specifically, nature-positive infrastructure development, when you look at projects that would aim to define themselves as such, we find that there are many shortfalls in application and definition. So to date, there are actually not many projects globally that we can confidently call nature-positive infrastructure development. There are many projects that successfully incorporate nature-based solutions and nature as elements into design and operation, but they do not, when you look at the project overall, necessarily meet the criteria for this definition. There's also, while there's surging interest in the potential of nature-based solutions and nature-based infrastructure to replace or complement certain functions of gray infrastructure, there's an implementation bias towards some well-established approaches. So we found, in some cases, dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of the exact same approach. But there are a couple of approaches that, despite really significant benefits, measurable significant benefits, and successful implementation in some contexts, just aren't being picked up at the same pace. So as no one in this call, I think, will be surprised to know, restoration of wetlands, constructed wetlands, sustainable urban drainage system, different types of reforestation and forest landscape restoration are the most commonly referenced solutions in some of these projects. Others, not so much, which we thought was quite surprising, considering that we know from our conversations with industry peers, colleagues, and so on and so forth, that there are certain innovative approaches that are being applied globally, but it just seems that the information about this is either not publicly available or we're not talking about it well enough. Not quite sure which of those two it is, but it is an observation we had from the review and analysis of these case studies. Related to this, there's a limited understanding of the full range of co-benefits of different solutions that we list in the playbook. Many of these are now well understood, especially those in the social realm. They're often not measured or quantified, which is likely to be preventing their further uptake. As we know, innovations such as natural capital accounting, that has become a pretty standard approach in some countries like the UK where we work, has significantly improved our understanding of the full range of benefits that ecosystem services bring. But this approach isn't being picked up at the same pace everywhere globally. So a lot of these remain described in rather high, at a high level qualitative terms, which is not really helping business case for them, we suspect. And related to that, there is really a need to continue to build evidence base for specifically nature-positive infrastructure examples, share successful examples implemented worldwide, and in particular, focus on the challenges with implementation of some of these, because that is another thing we thought was lacking when we were doing our analysis. There are very few projects, and I mean, some of it is for obvious reasons. No one's particularly willing to talk about things that have gone wrong as they're developing large projects. But it is important, as we all know, ecosystems in nature do not behave like great infrastructure. There are many times some of these solutions will not be successful, they will fail. And I think we should not shy away from talking about it and discussing their common failure factors behind them, just like there are common success factors around them. But the reluctance or unwillingness to talk a little bit about that and be open and frank is another reason why we think in some countries there might be limited uptake solutions. So what we hope this playbook would do, in conclusion, is to really inspire new generations of infrastructure designers, practitioners, to integrate in a more comprehensive manner nature and biodiversity into their design and operation, but also to share key success and failure factors with others so we can develop a knowledge base, strong knowledge base that will inform future iterations of this document and make it even more useful to audiences worldwide. I think I will end on that note and hand over back to Monk.
Thank you, Malika. Thank you for that insightful presentation. As an early career professional, who has referred to the playbook several times at this point, I can absolutely attest that it is very well created and does a fantastic job of relaying why nature positive approaches are paramount in infrastructure development. So thank you for that. Yeah. Now, for the next segment of the webinar, I would like to invite our panelists to join us. I will introduce them one by one. So we have Graham Ponton, Graham is the Director of Policy, External Affairs, and Communications at FIDIC. He oversees a number of key areas of FIDIC's work, including policy, advocacy and lobbying, economic research and thought leadership, and communications and media relations. Graham is an economist with more than 10 years of experience and has skills in market research and policy development and implementation. Glad to have you, Graham. We also have with us Evan Freund, who is joining us from East Coast. So it's not even 5 a.m. there, and he's already been with us for an hour. Thank you for making it this early in the morning, Evan. Evan is a Senior Director for Sustainable Infrastructure and Finance at WWF and part of the WWF US Freshwater team. In this role, he provides technical support and programmatic leadership in the implementation of WWF's global infrastructure strategy, addressing issues related to the intersection of conservation and large-scale infrastructure finance, development, and land use planning. Prior to joining WWF, Evan worked for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, overseeing investments in infrastructure in emerging markets. Pleasure to have you, Evan. We also have Karma Yangzom, who's joining us from Bhutan. Karma is a principal environment specialist, also here at the bank with the environment group. Karma is managing ADB's Asia Clean Blue Skies program and works on scaling up ADB's investments in improving air quality by supporting countries on upstream policies and plans, training and capacity development, and implementing clean air solutions in energy, transport, urban development, agriculture, and industries. She also leads initiatives on green infrastructure involving innovative biodiversity-friendly measures in transport infrastructure projects. So thank you for being with us here, Karma. And I would also like to re-invite DDG Jeff and Malika to join us on the panel. Yeah, so pleasure to have you all. So without any delay, so Graham, I'd like to start this with you. As FIDIC is the voice of consulting engineering community, how can its global brand and position be used to leverage and engage engineers and other FIDIC partners like MDVs like us to consider nature positive approaches to infrastructure development?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to all the other panelists that have joined and yourselves for arranging this webinar. Yes, I mean, FIDIC, as Daduna said earlier, one of its core values is sustainability, and its contracts have been established since FIDIC started in 1913. And so it very much plays a role in the engineering sector from its member associations in its national countries, which, as we said, covers around 100 countries, right down to their members, which are the technical people on the ground and the designers and the engineers. So that gives us a unique position to be able to push things like the playbook and information throughout the whole infrastructure sector. Now, the playbook is part of a much wider, as Daduna alluded to, sustainability thing that is going on. If you go back 2 years ago, the first global leadership forum that FIDIC hosted, which brings together global leaders, the issue they wanted to discuss was climate change, net zero, and how we get there. I always like to put some context to this. If you look at the research we did leading into that, at the scale of the challenge that Jeff mentioned, it found that by 2030, we have to double the amount we're spending on infrastructure from about 2.5 trillion a year to nearer 5 trillion a year. And we're going to have to spend 139 trillion to hit net zero by 2050 if we're going to stay within 1.5 degrees. That is a huge challenge. So we've got to double spending and we've got to do it fast. To give some context to that, 2030 is only 2,000 days away. That's not actually very long. 2050 is only 9,000 days away. By the time you take weekends and holidays and various things out, you realize there isn't really much time to do this. So FIDIC very much stepped forward and said, okay, how can we do this? The scale of the challenge is significant. We turned around and looked at how we measure the different scopes and discussed that in the community and brought them together. And then we also turned around and published the playbook and got in touch with WWF and developed this piece of work to help drive the sector forward. Now, we like to turn around and pull in stakeholders from across the infrastructure remit in that. Let's be honest, this challenge is not going to be bet by one sector or one community of people doing their own thing and not connecting with everybody else. It's going to require financiers to unlock funds. It's going to require engineers to design solutions that work. It's going to require operators to turn around and want to be efficient. It's even going to require decommissioning and changing how we potentially approach some things. So the playbook starts to really turn around and push the solutions that are going to be part of this significant investment challenge going forward. Now, FIDIC within that, as Daduna mentioned, has its contract suite, which very much are about delivery and practicality on the ground. And so we're able to connect the policy work and the policy making and influence that right through to the actual procurement and delivery of the projects on the ground, and making sure that we can truly take this challenge on and meet that 1.5 degree challenge. And I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham, for that. Yeah, indeed. I mean, 2,000 days, 5,000 days, way to paint a picture, but thank you for that. Evan, I mean, yeah, glad you're with us. Thank you for introducing us to the playbook first. Fantastic job on it. And Malika's briefly touched on it, Graham's briefly touched on it, but we'd like to hear more from you on this background about how the relationship between WWF and FIDIC emerged and how the playbook came about. And why is it important that the conservation community take interest in sustainable infrastructure?
Sure. Thanks so much, Umang. Thanks for having me. I also just want to thank ADB for hosting this webinar, for acknowledging the playbook, bringing it to a broad audience. Really grateful for the exposure, certainly, and as Jeff noted, for the very long and very fruitful relationship between ADB and WWF. It's been great. I think we've done a lot of great work together, and hopefully we'll continue to do so going forward. Just quickly at the macro level, and everybody thus far has painted a great picture of the issues that we're all facing collectively as infrastructure practitioners. But as a global conservation organization, we certainly at WWF recognize that the infrastructure sector is a major contributor to biodiversity and nature-related loss. But it also plays a huge role, or has the potential to play a huge role in envisioning new ways to deliver critical infrastructure services worldwide. And I think it's against that backdrop that, as Graham just mentioned, WWF and FIDIC got together about 4 years ago with the recognition that the conservation community and the global engineering community really, out of necessity, need to do more and probably need to speak together more frequently and perhaps from the same song sheet, so to speak, than we have historically done to address this sort of interconnected climate and biodiversity related challenge that was facing us. So really prior to COP26, 2021, FIDIC and WWF began a dialogue, a very broad dialogue about how the two communities could indeed work together to advance shared mutual objectives and interests in sustainable infrastructure development, sustainable infrastructure finance, and the delivery of sustainable infrastructure around nature-positive approaches and nature-based solutions, with really no defined goal in mind. Just again, with the recognition that the two communities probably had a lot to offer and certainly needed to speak together more frequently. But from that initial conversation, the concept of the playbook emerged. And as Melissa did a great job of articulating, the playbook is really meant to be a practitioner-based, practitioner-oriented guidebook, right? Really meant to be utilized, read, understood, and contributed to by the many actors in the infrastructure sector. And again, I think between FIDIC and WWF, we recognize that we have huge brand recognition out in the world. We're one of the world's largest conservation organizations. FIDIC, as you rightly noted, Umang, is the voice of the consulting engineering community with hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of members worldwide. WWF operates in over 100 countries. Has offices pretty much in every country imaginable. And we felt like there's real power in the partnership between the two organizations to promote this concept of sustainable infrastructure development, sustainable infrastructure finance, integrating nature-positive approaches into infrastructure development. So our first stab at a working relationship was to envision this playbook, and I'm very grateful to AECOM for helping us figure out what that vision ought to look like and how to deliver this playbook. And again, I certainly we recognize at WWF that it's not the only piece of literature out there that discusses sustainable approaches to infrastructure development, nature-positive approaches, but I do think it differs in a couple of key ways and perhaps most importantly, as Melissa noted, is that it truly is meant to be a practitioner-oriented, user-friendly guidebook. It doesn't offer all of the solutions, but hopefully it sort of helps navigate and set a course for how to develop, define, and implement new solutions, new approaches to major infrastructure programs and projects. And we see it very much as a living document, one that will evolve and emerge and change over time. The utility of the playbook, and frankly, the utility of our partnership with WF, between WF and FIDIC, is in receiving feedback from infrastructure practitioners, right? Helping us understand what's of most use out there in the world as projects are defined, financed, and developed. Graham alluded to this major financing gap, right? It will take trillions of dollars to deliver the infrastructure that's needed globally. That's a major challenge, and it's a very scary number. It also presents a great opportunity for all of us to take a step back and recognize we've got some sort of fiscal space, if you will, to think about how to put money into the right types of projects. I hope this playbook, and again, at a broader scale, I hope this partnership between what may on the surface seem like two uncommon partners, the engineering community and the conservation communities, allows us to sort of think creatively, imagine new creative solutions to delivering these critical infrastructure services, and not rely on sort of just old approaches to infrastructure delivery. I think there's a lot of room for creativity and imagination. I certainly think the engineering community is at the forefront of that, and the banks like ADB and other institutions who help facilitate the delivery of those services, we certainly stand with as partners to make these things a reality. So I think there's a lot of room in this partnership between WF and FIDIC and others to advance these concepts. The playbook is very much a start, and we look forward to the future, not just expanding on the playbook itself, but delivering new products and offerings to the market. Thanks so much, Umang. Back to you.
Thank you for that very coherent answer, Evan. I mean, like you said, an unlikely marriage, but a very welcome one indeed. So yeah, thanks for that. Just a quick message here to all of our participants. So we do have a Q&A session towards the end. So if you have any questions you want to ask any of our panelists, any of our speakers, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box now, and we'll start taking them in a bit. So with that, Karma. So as someone who has been with the safeguards now with operations, has closely worked with our developing member countries on the different positions, and we're hearing so much about the financial gaps and whatnot. What are the key challenges in securing funding for nature positive infrastructure, and how do you believe they can best be addressed?
Hi, Umang. Hi, everyone. Great to be in this panel. So in terms of the financing challenges, and based on my more than 10 years of experience working particularly in the transport infrastructure space, where I was the environment safeguard specialist, I think for majority of the projects, it's the nature, solution and the nature positive approach which gets integrated into the infrastructure project design is actually not that expensive for most cases. And what, from my experience working particularly in the South Asia region, is I think the challenge is more in the mindset of the officials or the departments or ministries that are responsible for the infrastructure. Because a road engineer, he sees his job just to build a road from point A to point B. And anything to do with forestry or nature or biodiversity conservation, typically it's like beyond his, remit, and they are not so interested. So I think a big challenge which I saw was really changing the mindset and really making them see that actually it's not that difficult, it's not rocket science, and it's not that expensive. So I think, and to change the mindset, we really need to work with the government agencies responsible for the infrastructure projects and build their capacity. There are great examples, in many countries of great eco-friendly measures that have been taken in different kinds of infrastructure. And I can certainly speak for the transport infrastructure. There are amazing examples which are working very well. and, organizing study tours and making the government officials see that, actually it's not rocket science. These are fairly inexpensive in comparison to the cost of the civil works, the concrete and all the gray material which is needed. In comparison to that, the cost for the nature solutions is actually pretty cheap in most cases, not all, but in most cases. So I think a big part is changing the mindset. And once we work on changing the mindset, then you're able to include more of these measures into the project design, and therefore the financing can get taken care of. Now, having said that, there are a few cases, and as we are working on this road project in Nepal, where the infrastructure design needs to be modified in a manner where there is going to be substantial additional costs over and above the normal cost for building the road. So there are some unique cases like that where it can be very, very expensive. And some countries, such as in Nepal, the fiscal space is very limited. The borrowing capacity is limited. And the country needs to somehow, build this expensive infrastructure for protecting biodiversity and for protecting species and landscapes, which are actually of, global significance. So in situations like that, I feel it's really necessary to support and help, countries in these kind of situations, and have more grant funding or even softer loan, lending facilities. For example, the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, which has newly been established. So perhaps, funds like that, or even under the GEF, there is now a specific integrated program on linear transport infrastructure. So I think we need more of these kind of funds to help situations like that. And I think also looking into more innovative kind of measures. There is a lot of talk about green bonds and biodiversity bonds. So if we can really think outside the box and try to find funds from these kind of measures. So, but this is, I think, from my experience, it's in a minority of the infrastructure projects. Yeah, stop there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Karma. Very, very important points there. And I guess that is where the playbook comes in as well. Like just a showcase of all these examples which show how many of these solutions are possible with fairly minimum effort. So yeah, all the more importance to the playbook. Jeff, so you alluded to this briefly earlier in your remarks, but innovations in procurement policies, they can help us better incorporate environmental considerations into procurement decisions. To that extent, what innovations has ADB introduced to enhance sustainability in infrastructure investments? And what more do you think there's still to be done?
Okay, it's a lot more needs to be done. But I think, it was to Graham's point that you've got to work together to do it. This month, I was at the Global Cement Manufacturers annual conference. Every single session was about lowering carbon in cement production, capturing waste, and so forth. So one of the things we need to do is continue with events like this that bring multiple stakeholders. We have the engineering from AECOM, we have the consulting industry from FIDIC, we have us as a financier, we have WWF as probably the premier NGO or international organization in the space that it works. So we need to actually work together, and I just like the phrase because it gets overused and it's a bit huggy, and I'm an old white guy and whatever, but it takes a village, if you will, with deference to my superb colleague Jenny, who leads on sustainable procurement for me, who many of you know. But it does literally do that. Procurement has to talk to designers, has to talk to contractors, has to talk to NGOs, CSOs, communities, and designers, architects, and so on. It's almost never ending when you think about the scope that this covers, the affected communities, especially as Karma will always remind us with her safeguards background. And that's on the one side, you know. I was delighted at that cement conference that every single topic was about lowering carbon and was about reaching net zero by 2050. And it's a conversation we need to have constantly. Some of the ways we can influence this through procurement are actually, and this is where the Scope 1, Scope 2, and especially Scope 3 emissions become particularly interesting. It's actually, and I think, was it you, Graham, that mentioned, Malika, about measuring things? How do we quantify what we're doing? And that is critically important, especially in a development context, where you may end up with barriers for you know, environmental negative versus positive and so forth in international trade. So it is the measurement and quantification of a benefit. And to be honest, I get Karma's point about it can be very hard to convince people. But if you can show somebody a path to doing something better, and you can provide a quantification, which is why I'm so interested in embedded carbon measurement as an example, that can be offset by nature-based solution in parallel. And that's why I'm so interested. So with the exception of my teenage kids, when faced with doing something better and a way to do it, most people want to. So it's about advocacy, it's about quantification. And if you can link that to a broader public good, such as meeting a nationally defined contribution for something as a carbon offset or carbon reduction and so on, even better. And also to influence policymakers in this, because I think many developing countries will be in danger of being left behind as the EU goes ahead with its legislation and regulation. And potentially the DMCs, as we call them, developing member countries, that need the access most of all to these affluent markers, may be denied access through it because they don't have the measurement capability that those markets will require. So that's going to, the setting of standards and the regulation of standards, reporting of standards is going to be critically important for nature-based and sustainable solutions, all of which we're trying to do. But as it was pointed out earlier, this is in some ways coming late in the game because science has known about this for a few decades. The rest of the world is just catching up. But we've got to get moving on quantifiable solutions. We've got to be supporting policymakers to make those. And it is going to take everybody, whether they live in a village or a city or on the top of the hill or on their own. So it's going to be a long journey, but it's a moral imperative that we travel on it. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jeff. I mean, indeed, there are no silver bullets, and it will indeed take a whole village. So yeah, thank you for all of that. And lastly, Melissa, so you worked on the preparation of the first playbook. You mentioned that you're currently working on the second iteration of the playbook. So I would like to ask you, what gaps did you see in the research when putting together the playbook? And how do you think it can be improved over time?
I will start off by saying that there are many research gaps, and we acknowledge this throughout the playbook. So if you read carefully, you will find that we have many caveats, many kind of reflections. Some of this we had to try really hard not to sound annoyed by some research gaps that we did not expect and yet encountered. But I think the most useful response to that would be if I organize my thoughts along the three key building blocks of the playbook. So in terms of sectors, key research gaps are really around successful application of some innovative solutions to key sectors like transport and energy. It was a real struggle, especially for energy, to identify some solutions that we could confidently put in the playbook and say, this is a project you want to learn more about. This is a project you want to really use as an inspiration when you're preparing your own. So that was quite disappointing and something that we were not able to overcome in the preparation of second iteration of the playbook either. So we paid particular attention to projects belonging in these underrepresented sectors, but with limited success. The second point with regards to benefits, I already alluded to in my presentation. So there is a huge gap around quantification, measurements, and we have to be realistic and honest here. Until we're able to measure and demonstrate that these are indeed benefits that are attributable to the solution itself, the business case, the proper case for some of these will remain weaker than a case of not doing it. I think Karma made some really, really brilliant points around that kind of allude to a type of attitude I commonly encounter as an environmental specialist working for an infrastructure consultancy, which is, oh, some of these nature-based solutions are quite cheap. Will that work? How can something that is so cheap, that isn't standard solution that we apply to our project, still work? And there's a common tendency of think of infrastructure versus nature, going back to the whole, how do we minimize impact on this to achieve this? Instead of how can we deliver the benefits? How can we get to enjoy benefits of infrastructure development, simultaneously enjoying the benefits that nature and ecosystems bring us? So that's a big research gap that specifically relates to benefits. How do we quantify? How do we measure? How do we make a case for this stronger? In terms of the solutions themselves, I mean, the key challenge that I personally had, and that sometimes is very frustrating, is the level of detail that is missing from the description of implementation of these. Sometimes that is understandable. Sometimes the sources we use are public sources with limited level of detail available and so on and so forth. But in order for us to be able to make some of these solutions replicable, we do really need to include a lot of technical detail around how they were implemented, geographic features, what were some of the barriers in place, because a lot of them will be actually replicable to other places as well. So we need to kind of build this culture of transparency around implementation of some of these solutions and really encourage practitioners to share their insights, share challenges that they encountered. I'm not saying this is entirely missing. There's some really excellent reference documents that we've included in the playbook because they do exactly this. They specifically say, these were the challenges we've encountered while implementing these. This is why we think they might not work in other contexts. So do not waste your time and money trying to do it because it will not work in these conditions. I think that is really crucial. And that is, if we're able to steer the conversation in that direction and close some of these gaps, I think we are potentially looking at a very, very detailed, comprehensive global guidance document that will hopefully remain relevant for many, many years to come. And this is indeed, I think, my hope for future iterations of this document.
Thank you, Manisha, for all of those. So before we start taking in questions from the audience, we have some words from Dr. Mary Melnick at USAID. She is currently based in DC, so she could not join us live this early in the morning, but she has kindly sent us a recording of her remarks. So Rick, if you will, just quickly, Dr. Melnick is the Environmental Security and Resilience Division Chief and has over 30 years of experience working on community development, biodiversity conservation, and the environment in Latin America and Asia. So Mark, if you will.
Warm greetings from Washington, D.C. My name is Mary Melnick, and I work with the United States Agency for International Development in the Asia Bureau, where I lead the Division for the Environment. It gives me great pleasure to convey to you today a message of hope based on actions. Today, we are not just having an exploratory discussion, but we are working and planning together on how, through the playbook, we can implement nature-positive and wildlife-friendly infrastructure. My thanks to the Asian Development Bank, not only for co-hosting this webinar with the Align project, but primarily for actively integrating and mainstreaming nature conservation within the infrastructure projects they finance. I'd like to also recognize the pioneering work of FIDIC and AECOM for making the original playbook happen and encouraging members to apply its guidelines. We also look forward to the Asia-Pacific program with Align. On behalf of USAID, we welcome our partnership with our co-hosts through WWF and the Align project. The Align activity is Asia's linear infrastructure safeguarding nature. And through the leadership of WWF and USAID's investment, we are forging new paths by partnering with architects, engineers, and the construction communities. We have turned a corner, as witnessed in this webinar, where the construction and conservation communities are now coming together to reverse both the biodiversity and climate crises. Align is working with governments to create policies that enable nature-positive investments, demonstrate best practices, partner with the private sector, and build capacity in this novel means of infrastructure development. Change is happening now with more infrastructure projects, including those financed by the ADB, being constructed with nature in mind, and with colleges, for example, which are including curricula for both engineering and natural science students, and even bringing them together in the same classroom. This webinar is on the path to Cali and its conference of parties for the conventional biological diversity. Conserving ecosystems and the species they contain are equally important to mitigate and adapt to climate change. The Playbook for Nature-Positive Infrastructure, while very important, is one piece of this complex picture of saving the planet and working to stem climate change. And its value rests in governments, the private sector, multilateral and bilateral agencies, using and testing the approaches defined in the book, along with civil society, conservation organizations, and communities as partners. You are a very special audience because you have a seat at the decision-making table, and your actions can contribute to conserving nature or not. We are clearly seeing that conservation and infrastructure are not an either-or, but can occur at the same time, and we have the tools to do so. Check out the Playbook. I invite all of you to join with us in using the Playbook and mainstreaming these approaches, and to make nature-positive infrastructure a standard practice and the norm. Thank you, and let's partner together.
Indeed, yes, some really great points made by Dr. Melnick there. With that, we can now move to our Q&A session. I don't see us having that many questions, which actually serves us well, given that we're already approaching the end. But yeah, please, those joining us online, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. I'm reading one question here from Araya Kase. How can we integrate engineers and environmentalists in a well-structured manner, such as preparing platforms in different educational curriculum, so it will create a grassroots solution? Anyone wants to take that?
I'm quite happy to discuss around that. So, I mean, one of the things that FIDIC has talked about and is quite important with the Playbook, but also educating, it's not just grassroots, it's also people that are in their careers as they go through. So one of the things FIDIC runs is its academy, which already has a training course on net zero, and we're looking to develop training on the Playbook that takes us forward, because it's no use having information available if you're not actually sharing it with people. And one of the actual areas that the academy is looking at is partnering with universities, such as the King's College program we do, to actually get the information and the knowledge and the sustainable practice and the work that's being done into the engineers as they come into the sector. But also it's about providing the information for engineers in different parts of the globe, which are moving at different paces. Not everybody is at the same level of understanding, and it's important that moves forward. I mean, one of the initiatives FIDIC's looking at is its carbon initiative, which very much centers on this calculation of being able to quantify, but then also how that applies to countries that are running at different speeds. So that capacity building and training element is essential if we're actually going to move forward.
And Umang, if I could quickly jump in, just to build on Graham's great remarks, a component of the Align project that Dr. Melnick actually just provided comments on is to work with FIDIC, use the FIDIC Academy to integrate, well, first to develop, but then integrate a suite of sort of bespoke or tailored trainings on issues related to wildlife-friendly infrastructure, for example, wildlife crossings, various design approaches to infrastructure development for exactly that purpose, to bring together the conservation, engineering, and planning communities and disseminate important information so that there's sort of an uptake in and appreciation for, better appreciation for how to design more sustainable, more wildlife friendly, or nature positive infrastructure. So, I think the fundamental point here is that education is critical. Continuing education is critical, as Graham's noting. There are a lot of great platforms out there. This goes back to the sort of fundamental principle that the conservation and engineering communities do need to do a better job of working together at the earliest stages. FIDIC has a wonderful program tied to its future leaders. I had the pleasure of joining FIDIC a couple of years ago at its annual meeting, and I think one of the best attended side sessions was of its future leaders program. This is for engineers who are under the age of 40, maybe. Graham can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the major messages that came from that was sustainability matters a lot. The environment matters a lot. We as future engineers, future leaders in the profession need to be thinking about and acting on these issues in ways that perhaps we haven't as a profession done so in the past. Utilizing these training platforms, speaking to, again, non-traditional partners to help develop and deploy some of these solutions is absolutely critical. And there are lots of great avenues to do so. Again, as Graham noted, the FIDIC Academy is certainly one of those. Thank you.
If I can add on that of the FIDIC Academy as well, which is working with its partners and also with our member associations who actually unite about 40,000 member firms who are the consulting engineering firms. So that's a primary access to the engineers as well, and coupled them with the environmental specialists as with partners such as WWF, the MDBs, and so the joint programs, whether academy or the universities or in partnership with member associations in different countries to reach actually each region of the world is going to be crucial in this. Back to you.
Thank you, Daduna. We have about 1 minute left on the webinar, so I guess we don't. So to any of our attendees, if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, recommendations, please feel free to reach out to any or all of us. I encourage all of you to go through the playbook, use it for whatever purposes you might find it fit. With that, we've essentially come to the end of the first webinar. I'd like to thank you, all of you, for being here with us today. We hope you found the discussions useful. I would like to thank all of our speakers, and also particularly I'd like to thank our communications team, Elga, Mark, Rick, Ross, and Kat. Thank you a lot. Yeah, for the second webinar next month, we will be discussing about the ecological benefits framework for investment impact analysis, with a particular focus on the Cambodia Sustainable Fisheries Program. So please stay tuned for our upcoming session. Have a great weekend. And with that, we're also closing the month of June, which celebrates the environment and oceans. So yeah, about that as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend and see you all in a month. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.